Good afternoon and welcome to Who's Right. I'm Sandra McFadden, and this afternoon we have our 18th District State Senator Randy Hopper here as our guest today. Welcome, Mr. Hopper. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you.
We're happy to have you here, Senator. And we know that you've been in the Senate for 3 years, and before that you ran a radio station. Is that correct?
Well, I have a couple of businesses prior to running for office. I own 4 radio stations in the Fond du Lac and Sheboygan area, and I also have a record label. I manage bands out of my Fond du Lac, and we have a Chicago office for that business as well.
Oh my goodness, and how long have you been doing that?
I've owned the radio stations for about 20 years, and I've been doing the record label for about 4.
My goodness, so that is extensive business experience that you've brought to the Senate.
Well, I would hope so. I would wish there were more of us.
Yeah, I bet you do. And aren't you serving on the Economic Growth Committee?
I'm the chairman of the Economic Development Veterans Affairs Committee. I serve on the board of directors of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and the Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Corporation.
So your experience brings a wealth of information to those committees, I have to believe.
When everyone's talking about job creation these days, I've been creating private sector jobs and helping our clients create private sector jobs for close to 20 years in the state.
That's fantastic. So I think that you must be one of their favorite members of that committee, because there's nothing like the private sector to give you the information that you need to create jobs.
Well, it's real life experience that sometimes is lacking from people that have been, there's a legislator that serves with me in the Senate that was serving in the legislature 10 years before I was born. I think you lose a little perspective about the real world when you've been in that environment for that long. Besides
serving in the economic area, you serve on the Veterans and Military Committee as well.
Absolutely, and I think they're tied together because a strong, vibrant economy in the state allows us to take care of those promises that we've made. I was very proud in our last budget that the governor signed yesterday. We spend more general purpose revenue dollars on veterans than have been spent on veterans since 1972.
Really? And this is a new law that has just been put through?
Well, it was put into the budget in this biennial budget. We're shoring up the Veterans Trust Fund by an infusion of $5 million. I think that's a key element to a group of citizens in our state that certainly we owe our gratitude to.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. We couldn't do without them.
No.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah, and also, don't you work on the Joint Committee for Finance?
I was. It was a great honor. I'm still considered a freshman, even though I'm in my second half of my first term.
Absolutely.
As a senator, you get to be a freshman for 4 years. And so it's a great honor, actually, as a freshman. I don't know of any others that might have had that honor to be appointed to Joint Finance that early on in my career. But if you really want to understand how the government works, and the state government works in particular, Joint Finance is where it all happens.
Is it really?
It is.
In what way?
They write the budget. So anytime the state allocates any resources or funds, it gets approval of Joint Finance. We tackled a $3.6 billion structural deficit that we inherited from the previous administration. In hard work and negotiations, we're going to see a $300 million surplus after the next biennial budget. That's significant, and it's done so without, we made a promise. We were going to hold the line on property taxes and protect the middle-class workers in our state. We're going to still provide the services that are absolutely critical, but we're going to have to make tough choices that previous administrations or previous legislators, Republicans and Democrats, this isn't partisan, have been unwilling to make. But we stepped up and made those. We didn't have federal stimulus money like the Doyle administration had in the last budget. We didn't raise taxes like they did in the last budget. On top of getting federal stimulus money, we didn't raid the transportation fund or the patient's compensation fund. We didn't tap one-time resources. What's happened, the reason we're in such a problem, have been in such a problem in the state is the state government has used one-time resources to fund ongoing programs. So what happens is you use that one-time fund, get the program going, but the program needs to be funded again the next time, but the one-time fund's gone.
Right.
So you have to tap into another area. And we didn't do that in this budget. And that's why, really moving forward, this is going to be very solid for the entire state.
So what did you do in this budget that you didn't have to tap into other resources?
Well, we made the tough cuts that other people have been afraid to make. I mean, last November, I wasn't up for election last November, but I went all around the state helping candidates that were running. And it didn't matter whether I was in Eau Claire or Door County. It didn't matter whether I was in Milwaukee. What people said to us is, we need to bring some fiscal sanity back to Madison. You've got to start living within your means. We cannot continue to kick the can down the road. We can't use accounting gimmicks or one-time funds. You have to sit down and make the kind of tough choices that people have been afraid to make. Before this session started, someone asked me, what's going to define this legislative session? And I said, political courage will be the defining sort of phrase. And boy, hasn't that played out.
Right.
Do people have the political courage to do the job, to do what's right in face of what you saw happen in Madison for the last 4 months? Right. That happens in our districts, as well. It happens.
Yes,
it happened to me yesterday at the grocery store when I was trying to check out of the grocery store. So that's part of what we're up against. People want to defend the status quo because they like, they're comfortable within that status quo. We're changing the status quo because the fact is we can't afford to continue to go down the path that we've been going down before. We're passing on the problems to the next generation and not giving them the resources to be able to deal with them. We need to stop that, and we're doing that. And once we do that, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to start to prioritize what we ought to be prioritizing. Now, I believe that government has three main purposes. We ought to defend our citizens, we ought to build infrastructure, and we ought to educate our kids. That ought to be our priorities. We ought to get out of the other stuff.
Right.
But we ought to do those things. We can't do those when we're sitting in a hole of $3.6 billion.
Right.
We don't have the funds to do that. So we have to clean up the house and build the foundation before we can start to focus on the things that we need to focus on.
Well, those very budget cuts that you just talked about, that you used to change the way business is done here, are what got you into this situation with the recall votes. And first of all, how do you feel about the process that happened that got you into this situation? What did you anticipate it? Did you see it coming? And what did you go through during that time?
Well, I absolutely saw it coming because I told it was going to come. And it was really based on what we did to set up for this budget. One of the changes I would have made is the Budget Repair Bill, Act 10, which most people refer to as the collective bargaining bill. It was about a budget repair bill. It has a fiscal effect on our ability to give school districts, local municipalities, counties, the ability to balance their budget by tapping into pension contributions, healthcare contributions, and some of the collective bargaining components that are all fiscal. They're all fiscal in nature. Well, the day that we were supposed to go on the floor to take this up, before I knew that the Democratic 14 had decided to abandon their constitutional duty and leave the state, I had members of one of the larger public unions in my office in the Capitol lobbying me on behalf of not voting for the Act 10 bill, and came out and said to me, if you don't vote for this, or if you vote no, we'll help you in your next campaign. Or we'll stay quiet in your next campaign. If you vote for this, we're coming after you. We're going to come after you personally. We're going to come after you professionally. We're going to come after your job. I own radio stations.
That's an absolute threat.
Of course it is. That's the way it worked. That's the way it's working with every one of my colleagues up in the Capitol. That's that kind of intimidation. I mean, they go to my clients and say, if you advertise on Senator Hopper's radio stations, we're going to boycott you. If you give money to Senator Hopper, we're going to boycott you.
Who is they that's doing this?
Well, members that were affected by Act 10. And you've read stories about them going door to door to businesses and saying, put up a sign. Well, if you don't put up a sign, we're going to boycott you. We're going to put you out of business.
Who are these members? Are they union members?
Certainly.
And are they members of the DNC?
I've never seen whether they're members of the DNC. I couldn't.
Okay.
I couldn't address it.
So they're union members.
And you said, well, do they see coming? I have a district with 5 correctional facilities, 2 universities, and 2 tech schools. 1 in 8 people in one of my counties work for the state, are public employees. When the governor came and announced to our Republican caucus what his plan was, I said to him, I said, Governor, and I believe this, I said, I always thought, or I always believed that it's more important for me to do my job than to keep my job. With the introduction of this, you're going to give me a great opportunity to prove that to everybody in my district. Everybody knew that. If you read when people wrote about where's everybody going to fall on the vote, my name always came up as they weren't sure for two reasons. One is I've worked hard to change the culture, to work across party lines where we can find agreement to get things done.
I see.
People want us to do that. The second thing is they knew how tough my district was for this. So I anticipated, but you know what? Doing the right thing is the right thing.
Right.
If I get recalled, I'm getting recalled. But if I lose the recall because I stood on principle for what's right, for moving the state forward, that's what I promised to do when I first ran for office. That's more important to me than to keep this job.
Okay.
I'm not here to be a career politician. I'm here to come down as a citizen and volunteer my time to work hard to try to turn the state around. I think that's what we've done. I believe it. I'll just tell you that Senator Zipper, a great colleague, was in the Assembly, just came over to the Senate. He said this, I think the day we took the vote on Act 10. He said, what we're doing right now isn't going to be what we run our next campaigns on. What we're doing right now is going to be what we tell our grandkids we did. We believe that in the face of that kind of intimidation, and you saw it, death threats, threats of physical violence. I had a police officer assigned to me in my district that every night when I drove home from Madison, I would get 20 minutes outside of the district and I would have to call his cell phone to tell him I was coming into the district.
My word.
And that if I had events, I had to inform the police where I was, or I couldn't go to events. I do a radio show on one of my radio stations, and I had to call it in because they didn't want me sitting at the radio station for an hour because they would know that I was there for an entire hour. We were in the face of that to do what's right. So did I know it was coming? Yes. Did I suspect it? Yes. Would I do it again? Absolutely, because it's the right thing to do.
What's your feeling about the senators that just, the Democrat senators that just took the state, just left?
We're working on those relationships again, but I had good friends, who understand that when we're in the arena, you go at it because you're fighting for what you believe in. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to go out and have dinner afterwards. Put that aside. That got lost in this process. I talked to a couple of my colleagues while they were in Illinois, and in a couple of cases said to them, you know what, you're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that you've tarnished the institution that we respect and that we love, being the Wisconsin State Senate. And I said, it's an embarrassment for me. You need to get back. Now, when they came back, it got worse. Because when they came back, they labeled themselves, it was on the floor of the Senate 2 weeks ago, we're rock stars. I said, you've got to be kidding me. You're not rock stars. You shirked your constitutional duty. You talk about the recalls. My colleagues and I are being recalled because we stood up and did our job, and they didn't like the way we voted on a single issue.
Right.
The colleagues in the minority are being recalled because they shirked their constitutional duty and left the state. If you, in the private sector, left your job for 3 weeks, you wouldn't have a job when you got back.
No.
And by the way, they expected to be paid while they were gone, which they were.
By the taxpayers.
By the
no
taxpayers.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, if you had to tell us what one thing you need from your constituents more than anything else, what would it be?
One of the things that I'm doing is I'm going to as many as I possibly can and educating people. I had a meeting with a correctional officer last Friday, and he was one of the very vocal people on television when they first did the recalls. You'd always see him out with a sign, and we're going to recall Senator Hopper, because I sat down with him for an hour. And one of the things he said to me first off is, you know what, the sky didn't fall. Because the threat was the sky's going to fall. If you let this go through, we're going to all be in trouble. The sky didn't fall. And we talked about some of the issues and some of the things that he was being told weren't actually factual. And by the time we left, he said, you know what, you got my vote. I'm switching my mind. You got my vote. And so, that's what we weren't. I just need to do that 30,000 more times between now and August, and then I'm golden.
Well, here's your opportunity.
Yeah.
You're on Who's Right, and we send this out to all Republican members of the RPW, so they will see you, and if if you have a message for them, this is the time to let them know.
Well, this will be an interesting election because everyone's mind is for the most part, made up. I mean, you're either on one side or on the other. This is going to come down entirely to who gets the most people to get out to vote.
Right.
So it's a get out the vote effort. So what I would say to those people, if they know anybody in the 18th Senate District, recruit 10 people. Have those people recruit 10 people. Look down your neighborhood and go, I'm going to take all the houses on this side of the street, and my spouse or my son are going to take all the houses on that side of the street, and we're going to make sure they get out to vote. If people are elderly and housebound, we're going to get them an absentee ballot. That's going to make the difference on whether we continue to move the state forward. And I believe, so strongly that there's such great hope here. We have to work on the relationships. There's no question. Moving forward, because it is going to take us all pulling together at the end. But at the end of the day, we're right. And I'm so proud to serve with a group of people that, I mean, if you saw us when we were huddled into one room, because it was the only safe room, or every afternoon we would get our security briefings on how we would get out of the Capitol that night, or that night we'd get a call at home to tell us how we would get into work the next day. And in the face of that, to have such courage, my colleagues that get it at home, you can't go to a grocery store, you can't go to dinner, it's tough to go to church, because it's so, people are so divided. It's created that sort of environment, and that's too bad. We have to work on bringing that back together. But for right now, it's about people getting out and voting.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here,
Thank you.
Senator Hopper. It's been a pleasure.
Mine.
All right, and thank you for watching tonight. And don't forget to go to whosright.org and tell us what you think of the interview. And we'll see you again.